Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday was Holocaust Memorial Day, when we remember those who suffered under Nazi persecution. During this dark time, Britain stood out as a beacon of hope, and 10,000 Jewish children came here with the Kinder transport. When his government rejected Lord Dubb's amendment on unaccompanied child refugees, Britain's beacon dimmed. Will the Prime Minister now devolve powers over immigration to Holyrood to allow Scotland to be that beacon of hope?
Mr. Speaker, I think she does a disservice to this country's reputation and to its record, because we have not only taken 41,000 children, unaccompanied children, since 2010, but I think this whole country can be very proud of everything that we continue to do to commemorate the Holocaust and what took place then.
Bill Wigan.
I know that my right honourable friend would never put our country at risk. I also know that he was born in America. So what plans does he have to convince the US Secretary of State that the Huawei deal is safe not only for our constituents but also for our allies?
I thank my right honourable friend, and he raises a most important point, which I know is of great concern to members across the House. And I want to assure the House, and indeed the country, that I think it is absolutely vital that people in this country do have access to the best technology available, but that we also do absolutely nothing to imperil our relationship with the United States, to do anything to compromise our critical national security infrastructure, or to do anything to imperil our extremely valuable cooperation with Five Eyes security partners.
Leader of the Opposition, Jermey Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to send our thoughts to the family and friends of the Royal Marine soldier who sadly died in a training incident earlier this week. And if you forgive me, Mr. Speaker, could we take just a minute to pay tribute to Nicholas Parsons, who passed away this week, and thank him for his work in broadcasting. This Friday, the UK will be leaving the European Union. The actions we take over the months and years ahead will shape our future role within the international community for generations to come. Britain's role in the world will face one of its most important tests later this year, when COP26 meets in Glasgow to discuss the need for drastic action to tackle the climate emergency. Given the scale of the crisis, does the Prime Minister think that we as a country should be financing billions of pounds on oil and gas projects all around the world?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me first of all say in deference to and in memory of Nicholas Parsons, I think we should all avoid hesitation, deviation or repetition in this House. And I can answer very clearly by saying I do think it important that the UK continues to campaign against hydrocarbon emissions of all kinds, as we do. And he will have noticed that we have just decided to ban support for all extraction of coal around the world. And that is a massive step forward by this country.
Jermey Corbyn.
Speaker, the report from the BBC and Unearthed investigation has revealed that a government agency has helped to finance oil and gas projects which will emit 69 million tonnes of carbon a year, nearly a sixth of the total emissions from this country alone. The effects of climate change have been felt in this country with flooding in Yorkshire and the Midlands, and of course with the wildfires in Australia. Despite pledging to reach net zero emissions by 2050, on current track the government will only meet the target by 2099. Can we afford to wait another 79 years before we reach net zero in this country?
Mr. Speaker, this government has doubled spending on tackling climate change internationally to £11.6 billion, and I'm not surprised actually, because he's so pessimistic, he's so gloomy. Don't forget, Mr. Speaker, that this country has reduced CO2 emissions already by 42% on 1990 levels, whilst the economy under this Conservative government has grown by 73%. That's our record. We can do both.
Prime Minister Jermey Corbyn
has voted against every proposal to take action on climate change until he became Prime Minister. I hope for the sake of our future he changes his mind before COP26 meets in Glasgow. And speaking of failing to take a global lead on climate change, the US Secretary of State is visiting later today. President Trump's latest Middle East peace plan is not a peace plan. It will annex Palestinian territory, lock in illegal Israeli colonisation, transfer Palestinian citizens of Israel and deny Palestinian people their fundamental rights. When the government meets with the US Secretary of State later today, will he make it clear that the British government will stand for a genuine, internationally backed peace plan rather than this stuff proposed by Trump yesterday?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. This is a problem that has bedevilled the world for decades, and the Middle East, of course, in particular. No peace plan is perfect, but this has the merit of a two-state solution. It is a two-state solution. It would ensure that Jerusalem is both the capital of Israel and of the Palestinian people. And I urge him, rather than being so characteristically negative, to reach out to his friends, my friends, our friends in the Palestinian Authority, to Mahmoud Abbas, for whom I have the highest respect, and urge him for once to engage with this initiative, to get talking rather than to leave a political vacuum.
Jermey Corbyn.
I have the greatest respect for President Abbas and those in the Palestinian Authority. I've met them many times. And as the Prime... Mr. Speaker, this is actually a very serious issue, and I think the Prime Minister should acknowledge that President Trump's plan will not bring any move towards peace, has no support from any Palestinian anywhere in the world, and maybe this would be a good opportunity for the British government to say frankly and candidly to the US, on this you are wrong. There needs to be a two-state solution with international support. The kind of test for this country for the future has to be how we work to end conflict abroad. The Saudi Arabian-led intervention in Yemen has led to the needless deaths of innocent men, women and children. Yet this government has broken the ban on Saudi arms sales 3 times, while Donald Trump has vetoed a ban on arms exports 3 times. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he will respect his own ban and will, when he meets the US later today, ask them to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia while they continue the bombardment of the people of Yemen?
Well, as he knows, the Saudi-led operation in Yemen is supported by the UN, a UN mandate to restore the government of Yemen, and it is absolutely vital. He's completely correct that the crisis in Yemen continues, and it's a tragedy for the people of Yemen. But I think what he should rather be doing is supporting the activity of the British UN negotiator, Martin Griffiths, who is doing a fantastic job in trying to bring the sides together and to get a peaceful solution led by Yemenis.
Jermey Corbyn.
Of course they're trying to bring about a peace process, but it's not helped when one country supplies arms to Saudi Arabia, which has led to the deaths of 100,000 people in Yemen last year alone. According to Human Rights Watch, Saudi authorities have stepped up their arbitrary arrests, trials and convictions and killing of peaceful dissidents and activists, including a large-scale crackdown against the women's rights movement. When the Prime Minister heads to Riyadh later this year for the G20, would he make it clear that any future trade arrangement with Saudi Arabia will be dependent on an improvement of their human rights laws and their human rights record, particularly in respect of women in that country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it won't have escaped the House's attention. The right honourable gentleman is a supporter and defender of the Iranian regime in Tehran, who have grossly exacerbated the tensions in Yemen by sending missiles to attack the civilian population of Saudi Arabia. And of course we raise human rights in Saudi Arabia. My right honourable friend, Foreign Secretary, raised the rights of women in Saudi Arabia only the other day. We will continue to do that, and we will do that ever more vigorously, ever more energetically, as we pursue our policy of a global Britain doing free trade deals around the world, which will give us the leverage to make exactly these points.
Jermey Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I condemn human rights abuses in every country in the world, including Iran, Russia and anywhere else where they are committed. My question was, what is being done to ensure our future trade deals are dependent on good human rights in the countries that we deal with? 9 women are in Saudi prisons at the present time, merely for standing up for equal rights for women. 4 of them have received electric shock treatment during interrogation. Is that the kind of human rights we tolerate? I sincerely hope not. Britain, Mr. Speaker, is at a crossroads. We're leaving the EU and Britain's place in the world is going to change. The question is what direction it takes. The signs are that this government is prepared to sacrifice our country's interests and values for short-term political advantage and a sellout trade deal with Donald Trump. As Foreign Secretary, he embarrassed this country, and as Prime Minister, he shows every sign of being prepared to sell it off. When will the Prime Minister accept the only chance of a truly internationalist Britain is to work with our global partners to tackle the climate catastrophe, expand trade, fight human rights abuses and promote peace?
Thank God he's going.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this government and the way it treats international affairs and the Labour Party under the present leadership can be summarised as follows. This, in the right honourable gentleman, is a leader of the Labour Party who has consistently stood up not just for Tehran, but for Vladimir Putin when he poisoned innocent people on the streets of this country. He has said he would scrap the armed services of the United Kingdom, he'd end our nuclear deterrent, and he'd abolish NATO, which has been the bulwark of our security for the last 70 years. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is leading the world in tackling abuses, in sticking up for human rights, in championing the struggle against climate change, and in leading the fight that every single girl in the world should have access to 12 years of quality education. That is what global Britain under this government is delivering. He would isolate this country. He would deprive us of our most crucial allies. We are going to take this country forward, outwards, into the world. And, Mr. Speaker, in case I forgot to mention it before, we are going to deliver on our promises and take us out of the European Union, despite everything that he and all the parties opposite tried to do this Friday.
Tally Ann Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This